Well, my task is almost done, really. I just have to pass on now to Mal, and Mal will, to use the farming analogy, which Mal's always very fond of, he can muster the panel together for the interactive session. So over to you, Mal.
Andrew, if you'd like to introduce yourself and briefly speak on the topic of how potential could be realised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mal. Is that system on? No, it's off. I turned it off, now I turned it on. Thank you for the technical advice. John and I are both having problems today. Hi, I'm Andrew Beer. I'm the Director of the Centre for Housing, Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Adelaide, and it's my very great pleasure to be here today and have this opportunity to speak. I'm on the Research Advisory Committee for the RAI and also a Fellow of the Institute. I think Mal's actually given me a very difficult task talking about how you can convert potential into economic growth or development for Wagga. And I guess one of the things that I would reflect upon is the observation that was made at the beginning of this presentation today, that simply Wagga has already been very successful in growth, in the sense that it's gone from a population of 35,000 when Mal was married through to 65,000 now. And I think that's actually a very important issue, because in some respects previous studies of economic growth in Australia's country towns and regional cities around Australia have always noted that there's a process of cumulative causation. Places that grow are likely to grow into the future in many instances. So in some respects, the potential that's obviously evident in Wagga is already being converted into growth and is likely to continue to grow into the future. So in many respects, that's a real positive. I guess the other thing I would say is to reflect upon some of the discussions I've had with my colleagues in the Regional Australia Institute over the last day and a half, where we've talked about opportunities for growth in places and thought about some of those processes and some of those potentials. And I actually steal Graham Hugo's idea in the first instance and say that it's important to identify those opportunities for growth that are a little bit outside of the square, which are not necessarily around the set of issues and industries that we currently think of. And Sue in her presentation has highlighted the natural resources that Wagga has, both in terms of its physical location at a crossroads, but also in terms of its natural resource endowment. She also alluded to the fact that there is very considerable education resources. And as John made the point in his presentation, human capital is the key to growth in the 21st century. So just to draw that together, I think one of the things we need to recognise is that you have an asset here which you don't necessarily recognise. It's called your population. Graham makes the point the ageing of Australia's population is not a problem, it's an opportunity. If Wagga and its region can think of ways in which you can convert the ageing of the population in this region and in nearby regions into an economic opportunity, you'll see sustained growth in that sector, and that is growth that will be stable, that will be available to some sectors of the population and the workforce that would otherwise struggle for employment, and also you'll have an industry that can form the basis for attracting additional population into the future. I was thinking, Graham makes the point that the ageing population desires services, desires accommodation, desires retail opportunities, etc. And on reflection, on my wife's side, I actually have two female relatives in rural New South Wales who work in the provision of aged care and aged care services. Now, the population's ageing in Australia, and we in fact face a future where we're going to have an aged population in Australia for at least 50 years. This is not a short-term trend. This is not going to be a mining boom. This is going to be a long, slow climb. So I think one of the points I'd make is, as a region, Wagga needs to think about how it can convert its ageing population into an economic opportunity. And that probably means working now and planning now with aged care providers and potential new entrants into the system, plus working with the planning system to see growth in aged housing and in aged services. The second point I'd make is really about education and the knowledge economy. So human capital is very fundamental to growth in the 21st century, I would argue. But also it's about the knowledge economy, undertaking research that's relevant to a region's needs. And I think there's some real challenges for a region such as Wagga, despite its natural resource endowment base. Research that focuses on issues about better water management will continue to yield benefit to the region over the next 10, 15 and 20 years, because the Murray-Darling Basin is a resource that will remain under stress regardless of climatic conditions, regardless of which government's in power. Research into better and more efficient forms of logistics, including transport efficiencies, is a benefit that will, or is research that will generate benefits into the future. And finally, I think thinking about ways in which to better deliver education services, because one of the things that is mantra within the higher education sector at the moment is not just that education is important, but that education is for life. And I see that as an enduring opportunity for Wagga. So I think for Wagga, one of the challenges is to work with your already existing providers of both aged care services and education services to think long term, as John has encouraged us to do, to think about how these two service industries can work with the established agricultural industries and manufacturing industries to generate growth in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Now, I'd like to call on Peter Adams to introduce himself and speak about how Wagga can where Wagga's potential lies. Thank you.
Cheers, right. Thanks, Mel. My name's Peter Adams. I'm the Director for Commercial and Economic Development for the Wagga City Council. I'm actually sitting in for our General Manager today, who's off at a local government forum with the Mayor, a lot of the inland mayors. We're particularly thrilled that the RAI has chosen Wagga as the regional base to highlight their research and to launch the stock take, and particularly for me, I'm excited about it, given I have an academic background as well, and I'm actually an adjunct still out at Charles State University through one of their centres in research in professional practice. And I guess with my research background, what all these guys have got to say, and especially this afternoon session, is of particular interest to me, because my research background is actually in the take-up of innovations, and specifically looking into household broadband adoption. And of the many things that we've talked about today, it's one of the key underpinning pieces of infrastructure going forward, which will enable regions to reach their potential. And I guess, given my role and my background, I'm particularly pleased that we've got this focus on research and policy making to give us a stronger voice. I think we've highlighted a lot of the issues today, and I think part of this session is really to talk to the panel, so I don't want to take too much time. But talking specifically about Wagga, I think we are a regional leader, and being a regional leader is key to our thinking. We're certainly bringing the region along with us, and I think we're showing other regions in Australia how good, sustained organic growth sees you through the long term. The councils took a decision a number of years ago to invest in the commercial side of our airport, so airports in themselves are key economic drivers just as a transport linkage. We actually treat our airport as a commercial precinct and a passenger precinct these days, and we're building on an existing economic base, and our aviation-related sector in this region's about 4.8% of our total GRP, so it's a significant part of our GRP, and that's a council-managed business which not only returns a dividend to the citizens of Wagga, but it also provides infrastructure which drives our region. Another one of our probably undervalued assets which council manages as a business is the Livestock Marketing Centre. It's almost 2%, or generates almost 2% of our gross regional product. $258 million worth of stock went through that Livestock Marketing Centre last year, over 1.5 million head of sheep. So in its own right, once again, it's a business that not only drives economic growth in the region, but it also returns a dividend to council. We've talked about the soft skills, and we're very fortunate in this region to have the River Institute of TAFE and Charles State University, which we partner with when we partner with the private sector, and the likes of the Committee for Wagga, and somebody mentioned earlier today about the important role of leadership, and one of the great things that the Committee for Wagga are doing is running an emerging leaders program, which I'm sure Chris will talk about later, but we're also developing those soft skills and that human capital going forward. And I guess one of our roles, as a bit like a piece in the Trivial Pursuit puzzle, is local government is a key part of the pie in growing regional Australia. And I guess the challenge for all of us is not just to think of regional Australia's problems and solutions as being geography bound. There's a lot of issues that we share in common with regions, throughout Australia. And for example, one of the things that we're involved in locally is the recruitment and retention of medical specialists. That's not just a problem for Wagga, it's not just a problem for the Riverina, it's a problem for regional Australia. So when we're developing policy, when we're looking at funding solutions to look at issues for regional Australia, we need to remember that we can't just throw all of our money and our resources at geography-based problems. We need to look at the issues, and sometimes those issues are spread throughout regional Australia. And the other danger, of course, is if we don't develop strong policy, we'll end up with very poor policy, and at local government we see that all the time. We end up implementing very poor policy, and I could dominate the panel giving you some examples, but I won't. But we end up being the front end who has to implement state and federal government policies, which was developed with good intentions, but it doesn't translate. So I think it's really important that we collectively work together to have strong policy to drive regional growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now, I've just stepped into the chair temporarily because Mal's just stepped out to do a TV interview. So we'll keep going with the panel, and I'd now like to ask Chris Fitzpatrick to introduce yourself and then say some words. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. My name's Chris Fitzpatrick. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Committee for Wagga. Thanks for those references, Peter. Thank you to the Regional Australian Institute for coming to Wagga and for picking Wagga out as a leading regional centre in Australia. I think it's a great choice that you've made. Wagga is probably the hub of the Riverina, notwithstanding Griffith is a very important factor as part of it as well. Just to let you know, because someone said, what's Committee for Wagga? Committee for Wagga is come out of the Committee for Cities movement, which is predominantly based in Victoria, but we do have committees for cities in Perth and Sydney, and Cairns, I think, is taking up the role. And it's a non-political group that promotes and supports their regions. So specifically Wagga, Committee for Wagga is to support and promote the City of Wagga and to ensure sustainable progress, identifying and implementing opportunities that will enhance our cultural, social, business and economic prosperity, and providing a platform for community, business and government collaborative effort to effect positive change. Committee for Wagga is based on high-level business people within the city across a diverse range of industries and service industries. So it's a grassroots-based product that can feed into what the RDAs are doing and what the RAI is doing, and it has local knowledge on the ground for what the city is doing and where it's come from. So when Mal opened his talk today, he talked about the floods in 1974 to provide some local content to his introduction, and Sue identified two things as being our strengths and possibly our weaknesses, being water and location. So a challenge in itself is the location of being on those crossroads. We have north-south and we have east-west. So we have double the issue in relation to making sure that those transport facilities and lines are open enough and in a way that the infrastructure can support the city in the future. Secondly, the water issue, and the reference will be to the Murrumbidgee River. And it's a wonderful asset for us to have, but it can be our Achilles heel. So in 1974, the risk management strategy around supporting Wagga during a flood was the call to arms that everyone would go down to the levee bank and fill up sandbags to ensure that the levee bank was safe. And there's probably some people in this room who were there, including myself. I was probably a young boy at that time, underage, but I was there. So that was how they treated risk management in 1974. The population has grown from 35,000 to 65,000, and in early this year, the next flood, the risk management strategy was to evacuate the city. So we have 8,000 people leaving the central part of Wagga City. We've got a lockdown for 3 or 4 days, business suffers, and the issue is, whilst trying to avert that problem, state government have announced a $2 million grant to provide strategy and engineering works to upgrade the river bank and the levee bank. And I'm not looking forward to the discussions and debate between local, state and federal government in getting $20 million to upgrade that bank. And strategy is about ensuring that your city's going forward. It's great to think of all the things we can do, but unless we protect the city, we've got an asset here that can go under, and we've got a Christchurch situation. So $20 million of government funding in to secure the city is a lot better off than $2 billion in supporting it and trying to put it back together over 10 years after we have a disaster. So that's just one small issue that we need to think about our security as well as moving forward. Yeah, so the transport issues, we will have some significant transport issues here towards 2025 when our population is 75,000, 2030 when our population is 80,000. We will have some issues particularly around transport infrastructure, considering we are a regional hub that is going both north and south. The airport is an asset and an opportunity for us to take ownership of that airport through Wagga City Council ownership. At the moment it is owned by the Commonwealth of Australia through the Department of Defence. So by moving the title across to the Wagga City Council, which is easier than what I'm sort of making it out to be, I know that that's a challenge, allows the city to have an asset there that we can get some tenure around the land to make sure that that airport proceeds in a way, as does Albury, Canberra to a lesser degree because it's privately owned, and Newcastle. So while that's a little problem for us at the moment, in that we are unable to develop that asset in a way that we should be able to develop, and that can change fairly quickly. Very, very long term, we've got to make sure that the high-speed rail, if and when it happens, it actually stops at the Wagga Airport, so that we don't get you know, wall blind in the fact that there's a few noises. Oh yes, we'll get you involved and we can stop there, but we've got to make sure it happens. As Peter said, we are working on our leadership program in Wagga. We're conducting a emerging leaders program for our young people coming out of business. So we have 30 inductees this year. We have high-level people speaking to those people who are imparting knowledge over 20, 30 years, people who have achieved in the city. We have Dr. Richard Harrison speaking about all those things you talk about, Peter, about retaining and attracting health medicos to our city, and the development of the Wagga-based hospitals coming soon. So there are lots of assets here and lots of things to build on. I'm delighted that the RAI has provided that database for a start, because Committee for Wagga will be doing its own strategic plan. Wagga, good to great towards 2000, we'll be doing that next year. We'll be able to utilise all that you've got there. So that document will be more a specifically Wagga document, which brings all that knowledge of the people over a long period of time into the things that we see as important needs for the future, taking on board all that's been said today. So there's a bit of a snapshot of what we're doing and how we see the future. And we could talk about, you know, meeting house prizes and lots of other things, but probably my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Tom, you're sitting there looking quite wise, but you're not on the list. Do you want to say something wise or not really?
Well, I'll say something fairly brief, I think.
That'd be appreciated.
Clearly the audience would like to be part of the participation. Simply to say that I'm very much wearing my regional hat today, so emphasising that it's not just Wagga, it's the city of Griffith, it's the range of fairly dynamic and vibrant towns in the region. Our area, the Riverina, covers as far north as Blantyre, where we're looking forward to mining developments taking place. In fact, the north of the region there's a prospect for considerable mining to take place in the years ahead. Obviously, Hay, Hilson, Lockhart to the south, so we're very conscious of the fact that prosperity is not just about Wagga, it's about the entire region. And one of the hallmarks of our modern age is that growing connectivity that's taking place. Not only our traditional forms of transport are improving relatively rapidly now. I mean, it's not that long since the Hume was just a bit of a goat track. Now we have virtually 4-lane all the way in both directions, a tremendous step forward. But there's the big improvements in information technology that are rapidly taking place, and that's going to increasingly make the region more a network. I mean, economists traditionally tend to look upon the economy as a machine, sort of a clockwork model, pulling levers and pushing buttons and so on. But increasingly it's not. It's a network. It's a network of individuals, a network of groups, a network of organisations, and it's that networking that gives it the strength. That's where the human capital comes in, that's where the innovation comes in, that's where that connectivity and that energy comes in. And as Einstein said many years ago, energy and matter are the same thing. If you have the energy of inspiration, the energy of innovation, that will manifest itself in something material, which is what economic growth is all about. So at the RDA, we have a very strong commitment to that networking. We have local government people on our committee, both elected officials and of course managers, including GMs. We have people from the rural sector. We have people from the educational sector, all getting together. We work under contract for both the state and the federal government, so we have that sort of triangular situation between local, federal and state. And if federalism is going to work successfully in all areas, whether it be health, education, infrastructure, there's got to be that coordination. So if we can identify on a regional basis what's important, then that importance can be transferred to all tiers of government and help them to coordinate and bring about a coordinated response to achieving the realisation of the potential that John was talking about in the whole range of regional areas. So we have a very strong focus on values, innovation, creativity, a commitment to a learning culture. We're very fortunate to have a range of educational institutions, the sustainability of the region, the importance of managing water into the long run. Someone said water is a competitive advantage despite the issues around water at the moment. It will remain so. And above all, we have an optimistic outlook about the future. We believe that the region has a wonderful future. As I've said on many occasions, the opportunities for this region are arguably the best they've been ever in the history of certainly not just Federation, but really since the First Fleet. We're really going towards wonderful opportunities in agriculture, in education, and health with the advent of telemedicine and so on. So really there is no limit. And the one thing about, you can talk about land, you can talk about capital, these things are obviously limited, but what is totally unlimited is the creative potential of human beings. There's a lot of creativity in this region. We've got to make that creativity manifest itself in material and social progress. So that's our vision, that's our goal, and many of the things said today I think interlock with our regional plan, which is on our website, and our goals for the success of the region in the future.
Thank you very much, Tom. You will include Borey Creek in your runner in the, just so I go home and report to my wife that you're working on keeping it going as well.
Well, I see Ian Sinclair here. I'm not sure if Tim Fisher's here, but yeah, Tim's from Borey Creek.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the most important thing that the Regional Australia Institute is looking for today is feedback from you. We're very keen to learn what you think about regional development and these issues. We've got a panel of people here and we are please asking you to give us your questions. So who'd like to start off? Yes, sir.
Basic one. All of the people who have spoken of economic development this morning have, in the same sentence almost, invariably used the word population growth. Are they inseparable?
Is that your sort of one, Andrew, or?
Yeah, I can have a crack at it. I think that's on. I think the short answer in Australia is yes, partly because our methods of counting regional growth and regional development are so poor that population growth is often the best measure we've got of economic growth. The other thing I'd say is that, of course, the trap to avoid is population growth without economic growth. What you're looking for is both population growth and economic growth at the same time. And I think part of the debate around the future of regional Australia is really about how you can maximise both population growth and regional growth, partly as a way of making sure that you have a consumer demand or a consumer base to support your services and economic activity into the future, plus supply labour. So I think the two are actually intertwined very closely.
Thank you, Andrew. How are we going? Don't be shy. Yes, sir, up the back.
What's the regional development doing for small business that they want to expand abroad?
Tom, do you want to tackle that one from an RDA perspective?
I missed that question.
We got a microphone for people, or thank you.
For small business expansion, you know, the growth into national level from WOGA.
While he's thinking about it, we were talking about this morning. One of the biggest impediments I've always found in my business career, I started when I was 21 and of course knew everything about everything that had to be known about business, but I could never get my hands on capital. I've struggled all the time in trying to get capital. And we were discussing in the forum this morning about in the old days, a lot of regional communities had mechanisms for helping people buy homes. So there was a way of retaining capital within a particular town to get businesses up and going. So that's one of the impediments. One of the other things we're doing up in northern inland New South Wales, there's been a lot of work that's been done about the success of bringing new businesses into areas, which is quite difficult. And one of the I think it came out of America, Andrew, you know where the piece of work came from, but if you are encouraging existing businesses to expand, what quite often happens is, and it was our experience in the northern inland, people are so busy usually keeping their businesses going that they don't have actually much time to work on the business. It's you know, the day-to-day stuff. So what we've done up there is we've appointed a guy who owned all the collect service stations. You know, when you go into service stations and you've got all the shops that are there now, he was the guy that started all that. And he's established a consultancy. And what we've done, we've put him into was part of a program of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority for those towns that have lost water. We put him into those communities, and he's identified businesses that are interested in growth, and he's assisting them with advice in a whole range of issues, from capital sourcing, etc., etc. So that seems to be one of the tools that does work. Have you got some more, Tom?
Yeah, I think business expansion as a way of promoting growth is pretty self-evident, of the connection between the two. But there's two dimensions to that. There's the growth of existing industries, or organic growth of existing businesses, and then there's the attraction of new industries or new businesses. But in each case, I mean, one's looking at the identification of opportunities. The definition of entrepreneurship, which has been mentioned a few times today, is about not just identifying opportunities, but having the ability to exploit those opportunities. And the ability to exploit them is not just a function of the ability of the individual or the group with that entrepreneurial idea. It's also having the availability of resources. And one of the constraints in this region, and it's been a constraint in this region for even during the deep recession of the late 80s and 90s, which used to surprise many people throughout the rest of Australia, when a lot of regions were very depressed, that we had a shortage of labour in this region, both skilled and unskilled. And we still do. We still have to attract people with the relevant skills. And one of the constraints on even the smallest of businesses is getting adequate personnel with the background and the training and the commitment to actually be involved in a business. So we've certainly got a very strong component in our plan about meeting that issue, not just in terms of having more training and more inclusiveness and getting more use of the existing human capital, but also attracting the necessary people to fill those bottlenecks that are holding back the opportunities for business to expand. But that said, we've got some pretty big success stories in Wagga in terms of expansion. Obviously, the local abattoir has expanded over the years very successfully, but they've always had a problem with labour to some extent. They seem to deal with it in their creative ways. We've had precision parts, for example, here in Wagga growing quite strongly. Again, a very entrepreneurial-driven industry. And there's a whole host of industries out to the west in Griffith based on the agricultural sector. So in terms of opportunities for the future, agriculture is going to be a huge growth area. The latest figures I saw, there's probably going to be almost a tripling of agricultural output by the middle of, by 2025 or thereabouts, possibly earlier. We've seen the talk today or recent times about the so-called Asian century and the growth in the middle classes. There will be a growing demand for food. It's been talked about in the past, but it is becoming a reality. And the opportunities for agriculture with proper management of water is huge, and all the related activities. And on top of that, as has been mentioned earlier, is the importance of the knowledge industries. Without the knowledge industries, there isn't the flow of expertise into these whole range of industries. And certainly within our plan, there's an emphasis on the importance of technology transfer, using the word technology in the broadest sense of the word to cover all the ways of doing things. Institutional innovations, mechanical innovations, information innovation, all tenets of innovation is the key to making businesses more competitive and more effective, not just nationally, but also internationally. So we have to think big, we have to think in expansive terms, we have to be bold, and the opportunities are there. that it can't be left just to business alone. The community has to work with business to make sure those bottlenecks are removed.
Importantly, what do you think should happen? What should happen to help businesses?
Somebody's got a great idea to make something big for Wagga. Who is supposed to go and see and talk about the idea? Is anyone available, or?
I guess we'd be a good start, come and see us, but obviously you've got the likes of the Committee for Wagga and the Business Chamber, so there's a number of organisations in town who could work with you, if it's, whether it's business, you know, event related, tourism related, but I'd say we'd be a good starting point, so make sure you grab one of my cards before you go.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Mel. Andrew Crackenthorpe, Director Planning, Wagga City Council. Thanks for coming to Wagga. Don't know who wants to answer this one, but has the issue of the role of, the future of the states emerged for the Institute yet? And are the states, in fact, an impediment to growth?
I'll give it to. Nobody's looking enthused.
I'll take that one, Crackers.
I started off my involvement in this regional development area with a notion of, this is before I knew anything, with the notion of getting rid of the states, or to actually start a new state, because that had actually been started up in New England back in the 60s, 60s, Ian, wasn't it? It went very close to happening. And of course, when the Australian Constitution was written, there was an expectation that there would be more states, but it didn't happen. But when I got involved with Griffith University and Dr. A.J. Brown, and I started to understand all the complications of it, and decided it was far too hard. So that's why I've gone down a different track. But who?
I'll just have a brief word on that. In line with the philosophy of optimism, I think we should recognise that states are here to stay for the foreseeable future, certainly for my future in terms of planning, and realise that all governments at all levels are potentially very useful instruments for helping local communities to achieve their objectives. But the important thing I've always found from my experience, if a local body or a local organisation has a clear sense of direction, has a clear plan, knows where it wants to go, and can provide a business plan which will show that there'll be a generation of jobs, generation of prosperity, generally speaking, governments fall over themselves to help the local community achieve those objectives. There's actually a shortage of really good plans at the local level. Governments are in the business of trying to be successful, making themselves look good, so we should use that as an opportunity to make sure that we leverage off all tiers of government instead of, to be frank, wasting time thinking about their abolition or their modification or whatever. We should focus on how we can best achieve what we want to achieve, utilising the existing institutions.
One of the pieces of work the Institute is looking at in the near future is to look at the regional governance model and capacity for devolution of power, decision making rather, back into the region. So that'll be an interesting piece to see where we can go. I mean, subsidiarity is well recognised as the best form of government. The more remote you get from the people, the more lousy the decisions. Yes, lady, thank you.
Good morning, Penny Scott from Resource Consulting Services. John, I was so delighted to hear you mention the importance of localism. And Tom, building on what you're talking about with the potential, and all these are all my favourite words, potential, optimism, opportunities, talking about the opportunities for agriculture, and yet I haven't really heard about food, because there is a big difference between agriculture and food. And with our current situations, where in Wagga alone, based on 60,000 people living here, 3 meals a day, that's 180,000 meals a day, roughly. And I would be astonished if there was local food that actually made up any more than perhaps 1 or 2% of all those meals. So not only do I see enormous opportunity for local food economies, but also building into food security at the local level? And I'd be most interested in your thoughts.
Who's going to have a go?
You're quite right. Food and, of course, fibre, they're both linked. But it is all about food from the point of view of the paddock all the way to the plate. You're probably aware that in recent times we've had the Taste Riverina Festival, the festival of food in the Riverina, and it's all linked. Agriculture, tourism, good food, good wine. It's raising the whole profile of agriculture. Agriculture is an extraordinary, exciting industry. I saw figures the other day saying that actually productivity is improving more rapidly in agriculture than it is in mining. It's an extraordinary one.
Increasing the proportion of food grown within a designated footprint of this area actually being available
You mean?
for 60,000 people.
You mean productivity-wise and boosting the yield, or? Oh, the farmers' markets. Absolutely, yes, yes, yeah.
But somehow with our retail food section at the moment, 80% of that is controlled by
Sure.
Okay, yep,
yes.
yep,
Because
yep.
it's not just in government, regional government, we actually need to be looking at devolution
Yeah.
of certain practices and systems which are in place now. Because, as I said, I bet maybe 1 or 2% of those 180,000 meals consumed in this area every day may come from local food. We grow an awful lot of stuff,
Mhm.
which is shipped out to processing, and then goes who knows where. We can't actually follow that footprint of where the food, the agricultural product is grown or commodity, and then bringing it back to our local area.
John, would you like to?
I think you've raised a very important issue. I don't think that it's a uniquely Australian one. I think these questions are being raised all over the world, as I'm sure you're very well aware. And it's part, food obviously a crucial commodity in that sense. But the issue you're raising has a wider implication insofar as across a whole load of sectors, across a range of sectors rather, what we've seen over the past 20 or 30 years is the stretching of supply chains, the emergence of global supply chains, and these were seen as sources of efficiency. But I think we're seeing a lot of evidence now that all kinds of corporations in the food sector and in other sectors are reassessing that. And we had a big debate in the UK about offshoring of all kinds of activities. And now what you're seeing is the beginning of onshoring. Now, whether this is a straw in the wind or a major new trend remains to be seen. Also happening in the United States, where firms which had relocated activities to China or wherever for all kinds of goods and services are now bringing them back into the United States because of the difficulties of managing these supply chains. And I think this is particularly relevant in the case of food. All of a sudden in the UK, I noticed there's this big debate emerged about food security in a context where, as your Prime Minister was saying the other day, the Asian middle class is growing. It wants more protein, it wants meat, and it's getting a lot of it from Australia. Big questions suddenly arise about where the food's being produced, where it's being consumed, how it's being transported, live cattle exports to Indonesia I was reading about. Very, very, very big issues. And in all of this, there are lots of problems and threats. But for the smart places, there will be tremendous opportunities if they can think through these issues in intelligent ways. And already there will be places doing this, and they'll already be ahead. So it's that notion of whether we see these things in terms of opportunities or we see them in terms of threats. That there's mixtures of both always.
And Sue McCluskey's busily writing all this down too, so we may not have the answers, but we got a lot of brain power that we can find answers for later on. An interesting thing, I've been involved in the development of a national food plan, and one of the problems we had with some of the Canberra people is that when you talk food security, they say it's absolute nonsense to talk about food security in Australia because we export bucket loads. Well, of course we do export huge amounts of meat and grain and et cetera, but The thing that concerns me, when you look at the trend lines in imports on vegetables and fruit, and particularly the market dominance of the two main carriers who have a huge dominance, you know, when you do comparisons to America or England. I mean, I think the top, you know, the figures off the top of your head on the top 6 supermarkets, what have they got, 40% or something?
In the UK?
In the UK.
Yeah, well, probably bigger than that, yeah.
Well, our top 2 have got 75 or something. But the problem is, as they start selling more of their home brand products, you know, the tin peaches and whatever, they're all coming from overseas as well. So that trend line's quite concerning. One of the things we were trying to get developed within that National Food Plan was to get a refocus of agriculture within government, to move it away from sort of being the bloke at the back of the room to becoming a front of government issue. So they worry about obesity and health and quality and et cetera, so it becomes a mainstream issue within government. Whether we've achieved that or not, I'm not real sure, Ian, but we tried hard, didn't we? Any other questions? Yes, over the back.
Tracy Valancisi from the Australian Regional Tourism Network. I'm interested to hear from the panel where or if they see tourism as a major economic driver for regional communities, not only in the Riverina but nationally.
Don't all jump forward.
I'll have a go.
Thanks, Andrew.
Just off the top of my head, a colleague and I wrote a book about 10 years ago called Developing Australia's Regions, and my colleague wrote the chapter on tourism, and his point was that tourism is the way in which every community in Australia can be connected to the global economy. Doesn't matter how big or how small you are, tourism is the way you can connect to the global economy. It might be a farm stay, it might be a cafe, it might be the development of some sort of natural asset. But for every regional community, it's a way in which you can connect to the global economy, and the internet has just made that easier. So it really is a driver, and it really is a great resource, and really it's a challenge of promoting that into the world market. I travel to Europe and Asia quite a bit, and I'm always struck at what a tourism destination Australia is for people living in other countries. It's their aspiration. For many people I meet overseas, their life aspiration is to go to Australia one day, and our challenge is to make that one day sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Andrew.
The New South Wales government's currently considering a position paper around where they want to put funding for tourism. My understanding is it's much more around the visitor economy, which I think's quite realistic, and you probably know more about it than I do. And we need to get away from this one-size-fits-all, and part of what that paper is about is tourism isn't always about destinations. So the biggest tourist event in Wagga is families coming to watch the Kapuka march outs. So we have 47 march outs per year in Wagga. Every Friday we'll have anywhere from 600 to 900 family members coming to watch their children march out at 1 or 2 march out parades. So people get enamoured with the big thing or the big event, but in fact we're much better off, as we do, putting a lot of resources into making sure those families here, while they're here, they know where our restaurants are, they know what other things they can do. We know they're at least here from Thursday through to Sunday, because the march out parade's Friday, there's a church parade on Sunday, so we know anecdotally that they're here. All we have to do is A, convince them either to stay another day, to do something else in the region, and or while they're here, go to our many fine restaurants, etc. So the answer is yes. I like the way it's going. It's probably a little bit biased given what I do, but this idea around the visitor economy I think is a much smarter way to approach tourism than what we've done traditionally. And it's very easy for all of us, including what we do here at Council, to fall into the trap of keep doing what you're doing. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we are aware of it.
Thank you. Your thoughts? Did you have anything you wish to share with us, or?
I personally think that tourism has a lot to do with the driving of regional destinations. The federal government have just put out a destination best practice guide to destination management, and that's a holistic approach to a destination, and it takes in everything everybody's talking about this morning. And I agree, yes, it is all about the visitor economy, and it is everybody's business. And I think it's a great way for communities and smaller regional communities to grow, but it has to be really effectively and consultatively planned. It's not just the moteliers or the restaurateurs. It's all about everybody within that community and that region. So I think it's a great major economic driver, but has to be worked in with everything else.
Thanks very much. Lady over here.
Hello, Janice Summer-Hayes, Director of Environment and Community Services. Mine's more, I guess, a comment than a question in picking up around the human capital and connectivity focus that's come through a lot of the discussion today. Is I just sort of wanted to highlight, which many in the room may be aware of, is just the research also being taken on creative industries for our region and the importance around how that is connecting between agriculture, education and health. And it's an emerging area, I believe, that we have an opportunity around, particularly with the broadband rollout as well. So just more of a highlight to pick up for today as well.
Thanks very much, Janice. That's appreciated.
Could I just make a brief comment on that? As some of you may know, the creative industries have been identified by the New South Wales government as a strategic industry. I think that paper is still open for submissions. If not, it's probably may have officially closed, but it may still be open for some sort of input. And there is a recognition that these sorts of industries are a major job generator, and they also have a spin-off in terms of encouraging creativity and an outward-looking approach to dealing with challenges. It's particularly important in terms of the young, whether it be in creative drawing or in orchestral development or whatever. All these industries are growing in importance. As our living standards rise, more and more people are moving into those areas. Broadly speaking, sort of tertiary activities or quaternary activities. And yes, they should be encouraged. And yes, they are, if you like, almost an export potential because they're linked to tourism. And tourism, as someone said, is really an export industry. It's not an add-on. It's a major export industry in the sense it attracts currency, overseas currency and Australian dollars into the local areas.
John?
Just a sort of brief addition, because I think, you know, Tom's point about the creative industries having a link to the tourist sector, I think is quite an important one. And one of the things which I think is happening in terms of this question of destination management, which you raised just now, is this thinking that seems to be going on away from place branding as the as the driver of tourism, towards a broader understanding of telling stories about places that can connect creative industries, agricultural products, tourism and so on. And I think there are some very sophisticated efforts to do this that are emerging around the world at the moment. And the key word which appears from all of this is this word authenticity. This idea that by coming to Wagga, you're buying into something, you're buying a sort of small piece of a way of life, which is reflected in artistic outputs, in the kind of food that's on offer, the types of restaurants you have here which you don't have elsewhere, the kind of wine you can drink here which you can't get elsewhere. This idea, I think, is a coming idea in this field, and there are a number of interesting people writing about it, including some of my colleagues back in the UK.
Thanks, John. Yes?
Just a question. You mentioned agriculture, the importance of agriculture, but there's a skill situation developing where, as you would know, a lot of younger people are not coming back to the farms and everything. So that's a comment, and it's being addressed here locally, but it is an issue for the future.
One of the interesting things that came out of the OECD forum in Canberra the other day was I asked some of the people about what was, I mean, they talked about a basket of packages that you had to put together to achieve regional development. But one of the things that they said was quite a noticeable improver was to get the lower skill base up. And that seems to be an area that we've failed in a lot of regional Australia. We've got a lot of unskilled people and we don't seem to be able to, I mean, I was talking this morning, the grain industry in the north of New South Wales is run by Irish backpackers.
It's an excellent point, Jeff, and Mal has reinforced it. Some of you may be aware that Professor Jim Prattley, who's still at the university, he's a research professor, and he's a former colleague of mine, has been appointed to head the review of agricultural education in New South Wales. that a paper has been released. That if you go onto the website on the Review of Agricultural Education, you can make inputs into that. And he's made a very strong point that the statistics, the official statistics, tend to disguise the shortage of skilled personnel in the agricultural sector because they include environmental scientists. But there's actually, when you look at agricultural scientists, particularly agronomists, there's an acute shortage. And for every one person coming out with a qualification in that area, there are 6 vacancies. There's an extreme shortage of qualified personnel in the agricultural sector. That's not well known to young people. And we should be encouraging young people in our schools, in our universities, to go into those courses because there's a future in agriculture. There's also a high return future in agriculture through innovation and utilizing modern technologies, satellites and all the rest of it. It's an exciting, extremely exciting industry, and we should be getting that message across to our youth in a big way.
Now I've got one up I've got about 14. One up the back and then one right down the front, please.
Hi, thank you all for the fabulous presentation, and I'm a PhD student in Charles Sturt University and an international student as well. Somebody has just pointed that the population of Wagga has changed drastically from 35,000 to 65,000. In my opinion, I think it's just because of the immigration policy, and maybe because since I deal with and I live with the international community, I personally feel that maybe because, you know, in the regional, we get the TR, temporary visa, very easily. So usually the people, they stay in Wagga or in the regional places for 2 years, and then because they usually migrate to the metros and all. So this is just a question to all of you that are we working something to retain those talents, because ultimately they have 2 years of experience in the regional places before migrating to the metros. So are we working on any strategy to retain those 2-year experience here rather than giving a chance to the new talents? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All I could say is that in RDA Riverina, we have a skilled migration officer whose full-time activities are identifying people from overseas who have the requisite skills to fill positions, and they can come over here on particular visas. And I've no doubt there's other programs as well, but we are intimately involved in that process at the present time. But there may be other people that can add to that.
Sandra.
If I could speak to that, Sandra Harding, I'm on the RAI board, and I think if the key point here is that when we have international students coming into our communities, what sense does it make in order to make sure that we encourage those people to stay? And I think we need to work with governments to make sure that that's easier rather than harder too. So I think that was a really fine intervention. The question I want to ask is this, and this is an issue that we discussed yesterday, and also this morning it came up in our discussions, and it's the issue of governance, which we did have rehearsed a little bit earlier today. And it's interesting just, the committee and looking at you here, the panel, we have a broader Riverina perspective, not to say that your perspectives aren't broader too, but you're here and your guys, focusing on Wagga in particular. We know there are RDAs, we know there are city councils, we know there are chambers of commerce, there's a council for. A network, I think, is a lovely way of thinking about this, but sometimes, there can be complications around a range of different voices. And I guess I'd be interested in your view about, how you think communities, and it seems that you do this quite well from an external observation, how do all of those voices come to be united? I mean, how do you go about forging a regional view, or can there not be a regional view? Is invariably this is going to be a fragmented thing? I'd just be interested in your observations and your lived experience in that domain. Thank you.
I'd like to answer both those questions, the one from the back and from the front. First, I'll start here.
Thank you.
Committee for Wagga is a new kid on the block, basically. We've been running for 6 months. We've put a lot of energy and resources into creating relationships across all players, particularly City Council and our state and federal government people. So because we're not political, we're very objective, and we're really for the development and sustaining and supporting Wagga, it's easy for us because we're not taking a political stance or any one line. We had some input into the Wagga City Council elections by providing some proactive documents for people to comment on, but it wasn't in any terms meant to be antagonistic or creating issues. So there have been some changes in the council elections. I think a lot of the proactiveness and basically all through that we were talking about unity and talking about unifying the city to project it forward, and that's probably one of our big ticket issues. So I think it can be done, provided you get clean skins who are not so much interested in the politics or you know, what people represent to any one degree. Cooperation, seeing people's points of view, getting on. We get on well with particularly council, who initially probably had some concerns about Committee for Wagga coming onto the block because we were seen to be touching on people's patches. But underlying all that was very much a desire to promote and support the city to take it forward. Most of the people involved in Committee for Wagga are long-term residents who are really looking at its future rather than trying to pick up a point. And then moving on to the question from the young lady at the back, just taking all that infrastructure improvements, growth, water and the rest of it, what we're trying to project forward is a livability index or a well-being of the city. So you can have all those great things and all that, you know, roads and all the rest of it, but unless the local citizens are getting a takeout, unless they're getting an improvement in their livability, you know, what's it for? You know, what are we doing these things for? We're doing it to make Wagga, to be specific, a better place. And we identify that. So Committee for Wagga in conjunction with Council are looking at various sort of small and long-term projects that will make Wagga a better place, including things like putting lights around our lake so that we can, you know, use that facility better. Things like improving the safety of the city through some identifiable film that might help the city, you know, be a little bit more secure at night time. We're also advocating for a convention / community facility that people can use, and then we can get some offtake on bringing those people for conventions. The river in Wagga, as Sue identified, is one of our biggest assets, but unfortunately we've got our back to it, we've got a levee bank around it, and no one uses it, and it's not the natural feature that we want to use. So we want to open that precinct up, even in a small pilot scheme to engage the people back to the river. And I know that Andrew, through the spatial plan, will look at those sorts of things. So I think it's about cooperation and bringing those ideas in an objective way to council. So this is what we are trying to do to make it more a livable city for people coming to the city, but in recognising that a lot of those university graduates are very transient and, you know, they do move. So we're trying to work on the livability index that improves our city's a place to be. So people want to be here.
Peter, did you want to say something? Or?
It's a great question, Sandra, and I think there's no right answer, is the short answer, because you either fracture things across so many areas that, you know, the funding basically is ineffective, or you take the economic rationalist view that bigger is better and you throw it all in one pie and it just becomes a self-sustaining organisation. So the way we are doing it, and the way I think it's working well for us, is through partnerships on a case-by-case basis. So we are involved in all sorts of organisations, and I guess it's a lot of the things that the citizens of the city don't necessarily see that we do. And I've got to say, Wagga is in a much more fortunate position than a lot of regional areas, because it's easy for us to get to Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra, which are obviously the key centres in Australia for influencing business and policy makers. But we're involved in organisations such as Riverina Regional Cities, which is Albury, Griffith and Wagga. So the perception out there is that we compete with each other, but in fact we work with each other, you know, behind the scenes on all sorts of initiatives. You know, this morning I was sitting over there, my colleague from Albury's texted me about this afternoon's research session. She's coming up this afternoon for a research session. We're involved in other groups called the Inland Forum, which once again is us, Darbo, Tamworth, working together on issues. We're involved in initiatives such as Evo Cities, which is really about saying to people who live in Sydney in particular, there is a better alternative, you know, and part of it's just getting the message out there. The committee for Wagga, the local defence bases, it's just the hard work on the ground and picking it up on a case-by-case basis. I mean, the Regional Australia Institute, there's already an institute called NERA, which I'm sure you're aware of, the National Institute for Rural and Regional Research based at ANU. So there are, so in some ways we are probably fracturing some of our government funding to a certain extent. There's another initiative which people will be aware of called Regional Capitals Australia. So I think there is an argument that we do need to look at rationalising it to a certain extent, but I'm not an advocate for trying to put it all in one bucket, because I think what actually happens is you just have a self-fulfilling bureaucracy and you just become like another inefficient, quasi-government department. So I didn't answer your question, but that's what we're doing.
One of the interesting things we found when we first started the Institute, we asked the Deputy Secretaries of the departments who put money into Regional Australia at one forum, and at a second forum we asked all the people involved in regional development from all the states right throughout the country. And the message we got very clearly from both those groups was, who the hell do you talk to in a regional area? The numbers of organisations is confusing to government. So I thought that was rather interesting.
And I think that's a fair comment, Mel, and certainly when I'm in Canberra fairly regularly over a huge range of issues, I used to often walk past the Department of Regional Australia and I look at this building, I'm thinking, who are these people talking to? There's a heap happening in our region, there's a heap happening in Wagga. If they're not talking to me, I have no idea who they're talking to. So we do talk to them fairly regularly, I might add, but you have meetings with people and they give you business cards like National Strategic Manager Rail Australia. And you think, well, we're building a $60 million intermodal freight and logistics hub. How is it that you've never spoken to me? So it is quite intriguing, and we do actually often wonder what happens over there, I've got to say. But you're right. And the interesting thing, one of the great byproducts of the Evo Cities program, even though it was set up as essentially a marketing mechanism, a branding mechanism to say to people, and it's a long-term, this is a slow bleed like a lot of initiatives, but it's really to say to people and targeted demographics in Sydney, there is a better alternative. But one of the byproducts of that is we've been used by heaps of government agencies and semi-government agencies as a forum to talk to the larger inland cities. So it's no coincidence that the NBN, for example, is being rolled out to 5 of the 7 Evo cities in the next round. That's because, as a group, we've been talking to them for over 2 years now. Now, that's not what the group was set up for. There's other examples of large commercial industries who've looked at locating in regional Australia who come and talk to us because it's their way of actually getting there. So I think, it's interesting how some of those mechanisms happen on the ground.
Okay, we're running into a heap of trouble with time, so I've been instructed I can take one more question. Who's got the best question? Fire away.
James Davis, Wagga Wagga City Council Manager of Economic Development. I'd like to encourage or see some form of a local investment model for businesses to allow for the circulation of money within the local economy. I think that while growth equals profits, it doesn't necessarily equal local prosperity. And so there is a lot of leakage even through investment. And in some ways you see the old systems like perhaps as a cooperative model, where it was a single commodity that more or less worked at the time, but for whatever reason became institutionalised or didn't have the governance models to allow for investment, or it might have been a closed door model, but that type of thing. So they're the types of things that I think local regions can activate. The mum and dad's investors today who are investing in Woolworths or BHP might think about investing into some sort of model that allows for local businesses to invest in or to expand from. And just before I go, the competitive industry thing that you were talking about earlier, I think one of the industries should be a measurement of leadership investment in the regions, but more importantly, there needs to be some spatial recognition of the participants to ensure that those leaders are actually spread across the region and not all centred in Bathurst or Dubbo, because otherwise the interconnection between, the hub and the spokes within the region aren't actually going to grow together, they're going to grow at a disproportional rate.
I think you were right, you did have the very best question. The leadership issue is in the indices, isn't it, Jack? Yeah, I'm not the spatial issue, I'm not sure. But we'll take that on. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Institute, thank you all very much for attending, and thank you all very much to the panel. Very well answered questions, top of the class. Thank you all. We're going to now invite you all to join us for lunch. Any questions you have, I'm sure the panel will be more than happy to give you some answers. Thank you all very much for attending, and I can assure you that the Institute will take everything on board, and we'll hopefully be able to drive some major changes for regional Australia. Thank you all very much.
Just by way of a general concluding comment, someone mentioned the issue of the range of organisations. I came across a book recently called, it was authored by Colin White. It was called The Management of Risk in Australia, and he pointed out that one of the reasons why Australia is such a successful nation in global terms, and it's gone from basically a greenfield site to a modern nation in a relatively short period of time, is because of what he calls the density of organisation. The sheer numbers of people that are committed to goals and ideals. Many of these are volunteers, and we should be harnessing that density and utilising ways to coordinate all those groups together with a focus. And I think this is the role the RAI can play by focusing on some of the key issues and giving us the research and the knowledge which will enable those groups to get together on a much more focus-based situation than the past, although we do pride ourselves on very close coordination here, and we have regular development officers meetings throughout the river region and so on, but we could do a lot better. And I think the knowledge and information that the Institute can make available will help that focus. So, look, I think it's been a great morning. Reiterate again the fact that we appreciate the Institute has come to this region. It's the first community forum, which is a great compliment to our region. We look forward to the exciting work of the Institute and congratulate the whole Institute, the board members, the staff, all those involved in what they've done in a remarkable short space of time, and will continue to do in the future to help regional Australia, which I think I can conclude everyone will agree has a wonderful future ahead of it. So thank you again. Thank you all for coming. Please enjoy your lunch available in the museum, and those of you who can join up in the afternoon, that'll be great. Mal, thank you. Great morning.